Somewhere along the line, spiritual traditions seem to have messed things up by trafficking in the notion of perfectionism. It was not enough for us to strive to live and love well, to do good during our days on earth. Instead, we began to hear that we should be aiming for nothing less than absolute perfection. To show us that perfection was indeed possible, if we only tried hard enough, some traditions lifted up very special people called saints and pointed us towards them as models of how we should live. Yet any of us, and I will confess I am one of these people, who has incorporated these teachings into our lifestyle and become convinced that perfectionism is a positive quality, can testify to the fact that it is exhausting. Exhausting because it is an ideal nobody will ever reach, including all those so-called saints, because we're always and ever limited creatures, flawed beings, humans, not deities of some kind. Perfectionism makes for an impossible existence. And as if it was not enough to have realized that nobody is perfect and that trying to be perfect wreaks havoc in relationships and communities and churches and spiritual lives, our growing understanding of racism teaches that perfection is a terrible aspect of dominant culture that serves to keep oppressed people oppressed and systems of oppression firmly in place. Last week, notions of perfectionism were in the air as part of the seasonal and spiritual marking of All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, the Day of the Dead, maybe even present on Halloween. Talk of death seems to turn us to remembering those who have died, and we have what seems a natural tendency to remember those who have died in ways that depict them as, well, perfect. Even our cliche about not speaking ill of the dead suggests that when a person dies, all subsequent talk of that person will be positive. All they did in their life will be wonderful. And in short order, they are transformed into a perfect person, even though we quietly know how many imperfections they had. Perfectionism was already well entrenched in my being by the time I headed off to seminary to be a minister. A word of warning, please. Ministry is a profession that invites perfectionism. As ministers are held to all sorts of ideals, we should be models of healthy living while also being available always and everywhere to our congregations, including during vacations and days off, which we really shouldn't be taking anyway. We should be endlessly patient and never show signs of frustration, even when our congregation is reinventing the wheel. We are to have excellent sermons every week and show up for every meeting with excellent ideas and manage our own time and the time of the church staff in ways that make for excellent operations, and above all, never spend any money. I've often heard from congregants who say to me, usually laughing as they say it, that I must be really glad to be a Unitarian Universalist minister, since that means I get to be human and am not expected to be perfect. And I laugh and think, oh my. We have our own very clear notions of perfection in ministry. We just use different words for them. When you prepare to launch your search for your next settled minister, Notions of perfection will be heard on all sides, pressing your search committee to draft a profile of a perfect minister that none of those who apply for the position will ever meet. No matter how much we recognize the harm of perfectionism in ourselves and our systems, it keeps being there. Which is why turning to people we might call saints can actually be helpful. Author Robert Ellsberg has written a massive collection of, as he puts it, saints, prophets, and witnesses for our time. According to Ellsberg, the true saints, not the heavenward gazing, halo adorned saints of religious mythology, but true saints, are the persons who, he says, apply themselves seriously to the task of being human, and in their own individual fashion, become authentic human beings, endowed with the capacity to awaken that vocation in others. In the process of living authentically, Ellsberg notes that saints are often extremely difficult to live with and usually manage to antagonize many of those who meet them. But so committed are they to living authentically, they are willing to pay the often heavy price asked of them, which is that they sacrifice themselves for others. Have you had the privilege of knowing or being in the presence of such a person? Whenever I conduct a memorial service, I hear of moments when the deceased lived as the sort of saint Ellsberg describes, lived authentically, even when it made things hard for those around them. I also hear how that struggle to live authentically became often a source of grace, when somehow, just by that person's presence or a few words they spoke, life seemed just a bit easier, a bit less burdensome, a bit more open with possibilities. While traditions that include the selection of saints typically list the performance of miracles as a criteria for sainthood, too often those miracles are more akin to magic. A more helpful understanding of saintly miracles would be the ongoing miracles such persons bring through their presence and how that presence mysteriously offers us grace. The grace of a saint helps me to see myself, my life, my immediate experience as more than what I'd believed. The grace of a saint lifts the impossibility of perfection off my shoulders and points me instead towards self-acceptance and authenticity. And a saint accomplishes this miracle of grace through their own struggles to be just who they are, accepting who they are, not setting themselves up as a false ideal of goodness, but offering instead the achievable ideal of wholeness. Who are the saints you have known? And how have you found grace in their presence? Those saints more often become officially recognized as saints after they've died, when their entire lives can be judged for its saintliness. I believe we're surrounded by living saints as well, including a good number of them right here. I hear you talk of one another in saint-like terms. You admire him for his courage. You admire her for her loyalty. You admire them for their integrity, for their kindness. Sometimes I hear you end that sort of conversation by remarking, I want to be like him, like her, like them when I grow up. given the conflicted times in which we are living, knowing that there are actual saints among us right here in this congregation is comforting. Our challenge may be in being able to recognize them. For saints tend not to call attention to themselves, which may be why some traditions decided that evidence of miracles would be required for sainthood, because how else would we know they were there? Yet to live authentically in a culture that encourages so much less, a culture that seems to give us only two equally repugnant choices of either living only for myself or living in accordance with the exhausting demands of perfectionism, to live authentically and to inspire others to do likewise. That is truly a miracle. I don't know that any of us are going to be the next Saint Francis, the next Mother Teresa. But we do all have a path to sainthood that lies within our individual circumstances, that engages our own talents and temperaments, that gathers up our strengths and weaknesses into the capacity to respond to the needs of our neighbors in our particular moment in history. Each one of you is unique, precious, and powerful. A saint whose gifts are needed now more than ever. So go out, all you saints, and work your miracles in this beautiful, hurting world. Amen.